So next up, we have our STEM, Space and Communications panel. And I'd like to call the moderator, Maia Weinstock, who is an editor with MIT News, to introduce her panel. Is Maia in the room? James? Oh.
We're all in the room.
Okay. Sorry, yes, looking at the wrong way.
How are you?
Great, thank you, welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. Okay, how's everybody doing? Thank you so much for having us here. We're excited to be talking to you today about STEM communications, and specifically space communications. So my name is Maia Weinstock. I work in the MIT News office. I have been a science writer and science communication person in very many different configurations for my whole career. And I'm really excited to be talking to three individuals with close MIT connections today. And if you guys have all your hardware, you can come on up. It'd be nice to have everybody take a look at you and like be able to see your faces while I introduce you. All right. Okay, sweet. All right, so I'll start from left to right, from your left to right. We're starting with Jeff Foust, who is class of 90, or has a PhD from MIT, class of 99. He's a senior staff writer with SpaceNews, who previously worked here, previously worked as a space industry analyst, web developer, and webmaster for our own MIT Technology Review. He is known for keeping a close beat on launches, space flights, space policy, commercial space, and the general state of the space industry. His projects include the Space Review, a weekly online publication with in-depth essays and commentary about a wide range of space issues, and spacetoday.net, a space news aggregator website. Jeff graduated from MIT, as I said, in '99 with a PhD in Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences, following a BA in Geophysics and Planetary Science from Caltech. Welcome. Next, we have James Dingley. James is a PhD student currently here in AeroAstro, working in Carrie Cahoy's STAR Lab. He was previously a master's student in Ollie Dweck's Engineering Systems Lab. His research has focused on physics-based market modeling of satellite-based internet providers, the hydrodynamics of floating platforms, supersonic jet noise, and Martian space lasers. James is also notably the creator of the Atomic Frontier YouTube channel, a popular engineering channel with more than 310,000 subscribers, which is so awesome. He's been through this particular channel providing the public with insightful videos about subjects from, and I just picked a few, but there's so many, sea monsters to the science of American cheese, which was really awesome too. And finally as well, we have Stephanie Sjoblom. Hope I said that right. Stephanie received her MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management just last spring, and currently serves as VP for Strategy and Business Development at Aurelia Institute, a research nonprofit and MIT Media Lab spinoff created by fellow MIT alumna Ariel Ekblad. While at MIT, Stephanie was closely connected to the aerospace department, as some of you might know, where she was serving as a communications coach and guest lecturer for undergrad students developing aerospace projects and presentations. These days, Stephanie designs and executes on Aurelia's operational strategy and focuses on key industry partnerships, program development and management, and fundraising opportunities. So please give a warm welcome to these three individuals, and I'm gonna come sit down and we're gonna have a little chat. Okay, is my mic all right? Sweet. Okay, so we're gonna talk about a bunch of different things today, but I wanted to start by just noting that when we're speaking today, I like to note whenever I talk about science communications that for whatever reason, the term science communications is still kind of like dominant, even though today we're gonna be talking about engineering, science, technology, you can add medicine, all the different STEM fields. So, if I say science communication, I am definitely still talking about engineering and all the others as well. It is kind of interesting how when I was growing up, I had no idea what STEM was because it wasn't a thing, it wasn't an acronym. I think it's wonderful now that kids are being introduced to the idea of STEM and being forced to learn what the various parts of the acronym mean. But for whatever reason, probably having to do with social media, but honestly, I don't fully know. Science communication has sort of become this catch-all phrase that we use to encompass all of them. So that's what we will be talking about, all those things, and they all kind of mean the same. So I wanted to start because each of you have very different paths to science communication. I know I had a very circuitous route. Some of you have started very early in your career with science and technology and engineering communication, and some of you have added it as part of your research. I wondered if each of you could talk a little bit about how you came to add a significant part of what you do as being a STEM or a space communicator. So Stephanie, if you want to start.
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. I think I'm the token non-engineer on the panel. I do not have a space background, unfortunately, and I'm so grateful to still be able to work in aerospace. And this actually, we're going to talk about that today, about how science communication needs to be accessible for everyone. My background is actually in marketing and strategy consulting within finance and fintech, which is exactly as boring as it sounds. And I thought I was going to work in corporate finance for the rest of my life. When I got to business school, that was my path. And then MIT does this thing where it digs its claws into you, and it's like, what if you did something super cool that wasn't business related? What if you did engineering stuff? And you're like, well, I don't have an engineering background. And MIT is like, it doesn't matter, come do it anyways. So I found myself exploring all of these different opportunities at MIT, where I thought, okay, well, I've been a huge science fiction nerd my entire life, obsessed with space, love the sky, big fan of the sky. And I thought, let's just dabble in this a little bit. And my passion for communications and storytelling really brought me into the AeroAstro. And I was very fortunate to connect with George, who helped me get to encourage undergraduate students to hone and refine their presentation skills. So that was sort of my entrance into aerospace. And then from there, I got involved with the New Space Age Conference. And suddenly I was introduced to this world where, as it turns out, aerospace needs more than just engineers. And I was told over and over again, space is for everyone. Space is inclusive. Everyone belongs in aerospace in one way or another. And I thought, oh my God, I don't have to do finance for the rest of my life. I could do aerospace stuff. And I ended up falling in love with Aurelia Institute, which is where I am now. We are a aerospace nonprofit dedicated to scaling humanity's presence in orbit for the benefit of life on Earth. So now I get to do some incredible storytelling, some incredible strategic conversations. I get to work with amazing partners and inspire people to want to belong in aerospace. And so that's my angle on science communication, is I get to have these conversations and work for a nonprofit that has this as its core mission, to really talk about aerospace more and get more people involved into aerospace.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to kind of follow up with each of you as we go along. But I'm going to have everyone answer this first question first, but I will dive deep into what you each do with your SciComm stuff as we go. So James, let us know. How did you get into this?
Yeah, so I've always really enjoyed science and space, probably from going to too many science museums as a kid. When I got to high school, I found out that to be a scientist, you have to really write a lot of papers and publish a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, I am terrible at writing. I don't enjoy it, and I'm not good at it. So,
at least you're honest.
Yeah.
All right.
I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I had trouble writing things. Was thinking I had to give up on this dream of being a scientist. But then my teacher told me, hey, you can actually, for this next project, rather than writing an essay, maybe you could write a video of you, make a video of you talking about it. So I did. I made a video of me talking about ecological sustainability in the local duck pond. Loved doing that so much that for my next project, a maths assignment on geometry, I asked my teacher, hey, rather than actually doing maths, can I make a video on geometry? Said yes, and I kept doing that throughout high school, kept making videos. Some of them to help study for classes. I couldn't always get out of writing essays in everything, but I really enjoyed doing that. I shared it with some of my friends. They used it to study. They said, you should do this. You should publish this onto the internet. And that eventually led to me publishing videos on YouTube. Then throughout my undergraduate studies, which I did over in Australia, I wanted to sort of explore what engineering opportunities existed in Perth, a place not really known for engineering, more known for digging things out of the ground and mining them. So did that, found that out there's all this cool engineering going on in my hometown, and again, published videos there, and snowballed into having a YouTube channel that eventually grew to become quite popular. I never expected that I'd be doing a PhD, which actually does require a lot of writing of proposals and writing of the actual PhD paper. I've got a little bit better at it, but I still enjoy making the videos on the side.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jeff, would you like to tell us how you came to transition from your STEM career, or your STEM degrees, into a writing career?
Thanks. It's great to be here. Being here is almost sort of a full circle moment for me. When I was a grad student here in the 90s, as Maia mentioned, I was in course 12, EAPS. But I would regularly go over to the AeroAstro library to look up various publications there. I went there on a regular basis. And one of the publications that I specifically went over to the AeroAstro library to read was SpaceNews. And so I've gone from going to AeroAstro to read SpaceNews to going to AeroAstro representing SpaceNews. So this is sort of an interesting moment in there. But I was always interested in space growing up. I think it was a combination of Star Trek, the original series, and Cosmos, the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan, watching that, and I thought I was going to become a scientist, and so I pursued that path. I always, though, liked writing along the way. But I thought that was going to be sort of a tool in my skill set to be able to support my scientific career. I think it was some point, particularly my graduate school studies, that I thought, well, maybe writing can be what I want to do. Maybe the research, maybe that's not quite the best fit for me versus the writing. And so I started doing a lot of freelance writing. This was the early days of the web in the 90s, so I actually took a publication, a newsletter that the Boston chapter of the National Space Society produced, and put it onto the web, and became one of sort of the early space publications online, and sort of took on a life of its own. And so after I finished up grad school, I decided to stay here, work for a year at Technology Review magazine, which at the time was on a building on the other end of Vassar Street. I think has long since been torn down. Worked there for a year, went off into, this was the dot-com boom, so I went off into the dot-com world for a year, decided to try and get back into space, and it was a sort of a long, circuitous process. If you were here this morning and you're hearing Julian from iSpace talking about sort of that long, low-energy trajectory that they're taking to get to the moon that takes months, it was sort of similar for me. I went off, I worked for a consulting firm for a number of years, and but was doing space on the side as well, continuing to write about it. And about a decade ago, sort of an opportunity arose to go work for SpaceNews and write for them full time for that. So finally, that trajectory finally lined up, and sort of I'm doing what really sort of makes sense in terms of the best use of my skills to talk about space and share that with a broader audience.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to just inject my own story as well, because people ask me all the time how I got into science writing, and I think it's really instructive to hear just how circuitous these paths can be, and just how uncertain. I mean, a lot of people don't grow up thinking I'm going to be a science writer. Many times they might think that they might want to either go into engineering or science, and then find that for one reason or another they didn't think it wasn't quite what they thought. But so I'll just say I graduated with a degree. It was a multidisciplinary biology degree, but my senior year I took 2 planetary science classes that I fell in love with, and really had a crisis moment where I was like, should I start over? Should I go back to grad school? I didn't do anything other than these 2 courses. Could I do that? And I ultimately had also taken a class in science writing, and wasn't sure I was going to go full force into PhD mode without like testing a few things out. So I ultimately went and started working in science journalism right away. I started writing and editing stuff for kids at Science World, which is a scholastic magazine, and then went to space.com during that same .com period for a short time and was a full-time astronomy reporter. And then like went back into kid mode and worked at BrainPop for a while, making scripts for educational cartoons and movies. And now here I am at MIT. I've been here for 11 years in the news office, and have also just like branched out into other fun projects. I think like the video stuff that you do, James, is so great. I do a lot of work with Legos. I make like Legos out of, I craft Legos into like actual scientists and engineers. And one of my projects actually got made. It was called Women of NASA. So it's kind of it's fun to kind of like put lots of different, your passions in different areas. And with science writing and science communication, I get to be an expert in something for a couple days or a week or a month, and then you get to work on a new project and not have, be so focused in one area. Okay, so I'd love to ask a little bit more detailed questions about your careers. So Stephanie, with your background being in management, obviously you're working now a little bit in the intersection between management and the space world. I'm just curious about like overlaps in terms of what you learned during your MBA here, what one needs, to support a new venture generally, and like what you're doing now with Aurelia, focusing specifically on the space enterprise. Can you give examples of how you use communications, both in trying to get a venture off the ground and also just specifically in your day-to-day now?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
As a business development person, business development is just storytelling, and anyone who tells you otherwise probably hasn't done business development. It's storytelling and how you talk to people. It's how you craft an email. It's how you write a pitch deck or a fundraising brief that's going to convince someone that your cause is important. And I think impact-driven work is so storytelling and communication related, because how else are people going to find that what you're doing is important and worth supporting? So I'd say as an MBA student, there's a lot of focus on frameworks and strategic thinking and how do you think about a problem in order to align with stakeholder interests. So that is so applicable to nonprofit and so applicable to aerospace, because once again, there's a problem that needs to be solved. How are you going to address that problem? What solutions do you have? What solutions can you find elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my day-to-day. Those are the conversations that I'm having. But I also think from a storytelling standpoint, what's really important is aerospace is very, I'd say, well-connected as a network, but not necessarily connected to outside industries. So another part of my job is how do I communicate the importance of what we're doing to the tech industry, the healthcare industry, artists, fashion designers. How can we ensure that what we're doing in aerospace reflects those individuals as well? And so a lot of the storytelling that Aurelia does is around democratizing access to space. Space is open to everyone. Visualizing how people can apply their skills to the aerospace domain, because it is a domain. You're going to need everyone in space. You're going to need plumbers and gardeners and musicians and chefs one day. So that's, I would say, everything connects. This strategy of how do you engage with stakeholders, which actually applies very well also to nonprofits and business development, which also applies to how do you get people to care about what you're working on who are not necessarily involved in aerospace.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. And I'm curious if you also overlap with I'm sure you guys have a media team, or maybe that's partially you. How do you connect, obviously, the fundraising and the support, but then also get the information about what you actually are doing, accomplishing out there into the world?
We do have a fantastic communications team. We love our communication. Everything that we do has a storytelling component to it. So all of the projects that we work on are somehow related to our broader mission. So everything that we do, from a space habitat, envisioning what life worth living in space could look like, to a space garden that envisions how could we autonomously grow our own food, to our STEM and outreach programs of flying a cohort on zero-G flights. all of those aspects will have a robust communication and media plan in place. So we always want to make sure that we're communicating the impact that we're having, because otherwise how are people going to find out about it? So we do social media, all the platforms, we do our newsletters, but then we also have the great fortune of being able to engage in places like this and tell our story through various conferences or big events. Our CEO, Aurelia, she's incredible, and she is doing a fantastic job of being able to get that message out. 2 weeks ago, she had her own TED Talk up in Vancouver, which is fantastic, and just got to talk about space architecture and the importance of engaging more non-traditional individuals in aerospace. So we go down all of the different avenues. We use all of that. Not necessarily me. I do more of the one-on-one conversations, but definitely the team overall.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, James, I have so many questions because I was watching your videos all week. And,
Oh dear, thank you.
So I'm curious, first of all, how do you decide on your topics?
That's a really good question. It really depends on episode by episode. Sometimes I get really, really into an idea and I just have to tell people about it. For example, when I did an episode on different types of satellite orbit, I found out, wait, they could be more than just circular. You can do them in these weird, like, loopy patterns or, like, flower constellations. I was like, this is amazing. I need to talk about this. Other times, there's a really interesting location that I want to visit. For example, I found out about the Long Lines towers when I was, it was like last summer. Basically, these old towers that AT&T built to across the nation and do radio communication or microwave communications between locations. And I was like, that's cool. I want to go climb one of these things. So I found a video that allowed me to go climb one of these crazy towers in the middle of nowhere. And sometimes it's just something I want to do. For example, I'm a runner in my free time. I enjoy like marathon running, and I wanted to find out, hey, what are the best shoes that I could possibly spend my money on? So I talked to Puma. I was able to borrow some VO2 measuring equipment, and then strapped myself to a treadmill and tested out every single shoe that Heartbreak Running company, which is just the running shop on the road, every single shoe that they sell, they just lent them to me, and I found out the best shoe for myself. So yeah, whatever I'm interested in, I'll go make a video on.
Okay, and I'm curious about your process. Does it take, like, how long does it take you from start to finish? I know there was one that took you like 3 years or something, but for the most part, like, how do you go from ideation to filming? Do you have a crew of other people that help you? Is it mostly just you? Tell us. We want to see behind the scenes.
Yeah, so you mentioned the most recent video did take 3 years. I was trying to find out what the best font is to make an I-beam from, which is a stupid question. Don't try to answer that. But more typically, they'll take me about 3 to 6 months. I'll spend a month on research, trying to just understand the idea, another month on filming it. It won't be a full month of filming. I'll go out for a weekend trip to New Mexico to film in a certain location there, or I'll fly out to a different place. And then I'll spend about the final month editing that. I do the research, writing, and obviously presenting myself, but I have an awesome group of friends who are very happy for me to pay for them to go fly out with me to Alaska or whatever we're filming at. And they'll hold the camera and we'll film with them.
That's so
I'm
awesome.
trying to get an editor, but it's hard to get someone.
Good to hear that. My last question is just how, if at all, does your work with the videos connect to the studies that you're doing right now at MIT?
Yeah, good question. I do struggle with trying to bring the direct stuff that I am researching and studying in class into a video, just because I know a lot of stuff about the science work that I'm working on, because I'm literally doing a PhD in it. And when I try to communicate that, it ends up being a 30-minute video that no one finds interesting apart from me and maybe like 2 people in my lab. So I generally try to keep the two separate, so I'm always having an external view on whatever science topic I'm studying. But occasionally there's something that I find in class or I find in my research, like the satellite orbits, that is just so exciting that I can bring it across in terms of a video.
Okay, great, thank you. And Jeff, I get asked this question a lot, and I'm curious, what is your day like as a space writer, and what are some of the most fun or interesting experiences you've had over the past couple decades that you've been doing this?
Yeah. I don't know if there's one sort of typical day, Most days actually start off the same way, though. One of the things that we do at Space News is we have a morning newsletter that's sort of a daily news roundup. And so that's my responsibility to put that together. That means an early start to the morning, since it has to be out the door by 9 o'clock Eastern. So that's what usually takes up the first few hours of the morning. And after that, it can vary. I can be at a conference. I can be having calls, talking to sources, doing their press conferences, press briefings, all sorts of things like that. So it can vary very much from day to day, which is actually nice because it means that there is some variety. It's not sort of a routine that is unchanging from day to day. The topics change, the manner how you cover things change. Sometimes you're able to spend time to go out and pursue a story. Sometimes a story pursues you because something comes up that's breaking news. I think sort of one of the great things that's been part of this is to be able to see the evolution of the space industry, particularly over the last decade or so. We used to be, in fact, when I started at Space News, launches were sort of rare. They're sort of events. No matter what was launching, it was worth covering because worldwide there was only 70, 80, 90 launches a year. Last year there were over 250 launches. So you stop covering individual launches. So an individual Starlink launch doesn't get covered. An individual launch of NRO satellites doesn't get covered. But there are still milestones. There are interesting things along the way. Artemis 1, I got to be at Kennedy Space Center for the launch of Artemis 1 and seeing Space Launch System take off and literally turn night into day as it lifted off. I got to be at Spaceport America, New Mexico, when Virgin Galactic flew Richard Branson into space, and then about a week later in West Texas when Blue Origin flew Jeff Bezos to space. They both came back for better or for worse, but it's an exciting time. So there's a lot going on. It's tough to keep up with what's going on, even for those of us who are on the beat full time. But that's what does make it interesting and exciting. And it's better to have too much to cover than not enough.
I'm curious, over your career, how have things changed for you? Do you feel like you've evolved some of your skills? Like, how has new media, like social media, changed what you do or not? I'm just curious if you could take left.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, sort of the atomic unit of our work, the article, still exists in much the same form as it has over the years, although it ends up now online rather than in print. When I started at Space News, we were still publishing weekly. We'd start off with Monday with sort of like how we're going to fill a 24 or 32 page edition by Friday. By Friday, we managed to fill it and get out the door. Now we do a monthly magazine instead, but we are publishing even more than ever online. So, I mean, that part has changed, but the actual articles and such itself has not necessarily changed as much. We are doing more sort of newer media. We're doing a series of webinars. We have a podcast, things like that. Obviously, use social media to both sort of keep up with what's going on, because some companies and organizations use social media as their primary forms of distribution rather than the old-fashioned press release. But then also to use it, obviously, to publicize what we're doing and in reporting, and maybe sometimes add little bite-sized pieces of context to what various people are saying online about these issues.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. And we'll come back to the social media thing. I wanted to touch on that toward the end. But, we're here today to celebrate all things about space. And considering each of you touch on space communications and, in some cases, research, what would you say, and I'm going to just ask each of you, no order to answer, would be the role of space comms in creating or deepening connections among those who participate in these AeroAstro or other space fields, physics, astrophysics. In other words, how can effective space communications improve the space community as a whole? Anyone? James, you want to try?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, what I really like about the communication side that I get to do is I get to take a little bit of a step back and see okay, we're doing this thing in aerospace now, but why are we doing this? Who are the people that led to this thing existing? And yeah, I just like the broader context of here's this thing and here's it in context of all the disciplines that have been part of it, and here's the weird historical reasons why we do things the way that we do. I think that's quite cool.
Excellent.
I would say that communications is something that everyone in this room can do. You're just going to be doing it to different audiences. And one of the most important aspects of that is knowing what your audience is, who you're trying to reach, what message you're trying to get across. SpaceNews, even though it sounds like we have a fairly broad name, we really focus on the business and policy of space. So we're not doing a lot of the cool science discoveries. Ironically, even though my background's in planetary science, I'm not writing about planetary science, except when it intersects with like NASA budgets or mission milestones or things like that. But really, anyone in this room, whether it's through social media or just interacting in person with people outside of your group, can do communication and can talk about what you're doing and why it's important.
I'm going to harp on the importance of outreach to get more people involved in STEM. So one of the big programs that we do at Aurelia Institute is called the Horizon Program, where we invite a cohort of young individuals, whether they're researchers, entrepreneurs, startups, we've had fashion designers, artists, to design something for microgravity over the course of 5 months. And at the end of 5 months, we then fly those individuals on a zero-G flight or a parabolic flight, which is the plane that does the parabolas and it simulates microgravity. And it allows these individuals to test their work in microgravity, which is a fantastic opportunity to further whatever research or work that you're doing. And storytelling is a huge component of that. And some of the work that's come out of our Horizon cohorts have been really fantastic and impactful, both from a STEM standpoint, but also just to get the A, so STEAM rather than STEM, the arts part of that acronym, where we've had individuals say, after the fact, come up to us and say, hey, I saw that you flew this fashion designer in space who designed a dress that represented the national Nepalese flower. It's a red rhododendron, and in microgravity, the dress unfolds and it literally blooms in microgravity. And to see people say, I didn't know that I could be artistic in space is fantastic, right? To be able to inspire someone to think, maybe I do belong in aerospace. And that's only possible through communications. You can only do that by having the conversations and telling the stories about that. So storytelling is an important component in the work that we do. And I think that for me, as someone who was not traditionally aerospace, being able to benefit to say, oh my goodness, look, other people are doing cool things and I can be part of that community, that's fantastic. I'm now feeling empowered to take that step. So that's what I think STEM communication can do for both our industry, but also industries outside of aerospace.
That's very cool, and that kind of lends itself into my next question, which is, and Jeff touched on this a little bit, can you give some examples of how people, whether students, faculty, staff, anyone who's interested in furthering their career or just getting involved more in aerospace, what are examples of actual things you can do to do that kind of outreach? Like, let's say you don't already have a YouTube channel. How can you get involved? Like, what are good first steps for people who really haven't worked on it too much yet?
I feel like James is most
Okay.
qualified
Yeah,
to talk about this first.
Go start a YouTube channel. It's the technology we have nowadays is crazy. You just grab your phone, you can vlog it yourself, you can set up on a tripod if you want to be fancy, and you can communicate it that way. I find that's fantastic. In terms of what might be easier to do, people who write articles like long blog posts on their personal website or on their social media, I find a really interesting way of finding out what cool people are doing in science. I do use that a lot, especially to find out what new research is happening that I can come and visit with my proper camera kit. Yeah, and also just tell your friends about the interesting science you're doing, because I love hearing about what cool stuff people are working on just in my lab and with my friends. Direct communication with people is really important.
Stefan, you talked about art and how that can be an inroad. What are examples of things that might have drawn you in, or that you might have participated in? Have you ever been part of a gallery exhibit, or done a little project yourself that you shared, or know of people who did that?
How long do we have? Let's see. Yeah. Where do we even begin? So our Horizon cohort is It's got a good ratio of actual startup research or entrepreneurs and more like artistic ventures. And so it's been really lovely to get to see the whole gambit through the Horizon program. And we've been incredibly fortunate to also get to partner with MIT, who have also flown with us on some of those programs, and getting to see the research that comes out of those students' work is fantastic. I mentioned the rhododendron, that's one of my favorites. We've had individuals who have designed other sort of flight suits for space that engage differently in microgravity. We've had actual art installations, art pieces where someone painted in microgravity within a contained space within bags, which is really fun just to see what that could look like. We've flown musical instruments that behave differently in zero-G versus on the ground, who have actually played music that has been played for the first time in a microgravity environment. So those are some of the more artistic things that we look at. But then if I pivot back to the work that Aurelia does internally, we have a research and development lab or branch, I want to call it. And as part of that, we look at how can you innovate in space in a way that is both functional, practical, useful, but also beautiful. So this summer, we're actually going to be exhibiting in Italy at the Biennale, the Architecture Biennale, which is a big art and architecture show that happens every 2 years. And we're showcasing a space garden concept. So what does it look like to autonomously grow plants in orbit in a way that is both efficient but also beautiful? How can we make it into something that humanity is interested in wanting to go and look at or can feel proud of putting up into space? And so us putting a space exhibit at the Biennale is a perfect example of utilizing more of that art angle or art world to inspire people to think about what they could theoretically be doing in space. So it is connecting, once again, that art and science part of things.
Absolutely. I will say I actually curated an exhibit once on portraits of women in STEM fields, and let me tell you, the outpouring of love and the stories that just come out when you add the art element are just really unique and interesting in a way that, you know, if you were just doing a straight article or even a video is a little bit, it's just different. So thank you for that. Jeff, you were talking about how earlier in your career you were like dabbling in different media and like even were working on early websites. How can people get involved these days? You know, and also, what do you think about like pitching to an outlet like yours? How do people get started thinking about like, you know, actually submitting like op-eds and things like this as another way to kind of hone your science communication skills?
Yeah, I mean, those are good ideas. Had the benefit, timing being in sort of the early wide open days of the web where people were desperate for like any sort of new content. When there are literally lists of like, here's the new website that showed up in the last week. And there was a short list because it was still the early days of the web. The hurdles to get attention are a little higher now, especially trying to find, you know, sort of to find out how the algorithm works to get noticed on social media is a big challenge, but certainly that's one way to do it. I know in terms of writing, we do take op-ed submissions at SpaceNews. Other publications do that as well. If you want to write, there are opportunities to freelance and perhaps provide coverage or an angle that they're looking for that they're not otherwise able to provide. Those are all opportunities there. You know, you sort of have to be open to like, you know, looking at different things and maybe things that are a little outside of your comfort zone that you're not necessarily used to doing, but giving it a shot, try something and see if that feels like a good way of communicating. Because again, it gets back to the point I was making earlier. If you're doing this, the key questions are who you're trying to reach and what message you're trying to provide. And so if you're able to answer those questions, then the opportunities to be able to do that will start to become a little clearer.
Definitely. I'll also put a pitch into for, you know, if you're a student or you're just early in your career, the pitch competition that we just had before was really great. And I will add that if you ever have an opportunity to talk to kids about what you're working on, that will help you out very quickly because you'll realize very fast that certain things will just go over their head. And so to be able to simplify the concepts of whatever you're working on, or just to some subject, like it was just Earth Day yesterday, or whatever, Space Month, Space Day. You know, there's nothing quite as humbling as having a kid tell you, like, I didn't understand anything you said. And that forces you really to refocus and, you know, just, again, simplify and use smaller words to really engage and also make things really fun. Like when you're sitting there in front of like a third grader or a fourth grader, you know, I've actually had to do this recently with my own kid in their class. You know, it absolutely focuses your attention on like, what are the most essential things that I have to get across to get this point through? And, you know, especially when, like, as I'm someone who's gone back and forth between writing for adults and writing for children, I really will say, like, there's nothing like doing that. So especially if you're a student here, there's so many opportunities here in Cambridge to connect with the local community. I definitely highly recommend trying that out. We touched on social media really briefly. I think each of you have mentioned it in some ways, but I'm just curious, what are the tools that you personally like to use these days for social media outreach, whether for your own personal reasons or to, you know, communicate science or STEM or space, whatever the day may be, concepts, ideas, thoughts? I personally will tell you, I have been on a bit of a social media hiatus. These days, I'm more interested in just communicating face-to-face, but I have done a lot of social media in my time. I actually used to do it quite regularly for the news office. I now focus on the MIT daily newsletter, which some of the content of which goes into social as well. Personally, I still like Instagram because it's very visual, as you noted, but I'm curious just what you guys tend to like the most. I don't know if you guys are on TikTok, whatever.
Is this us personally?
Either way.
Okay, great. My answer is the boring one. I love LinkedIn. From a business development standpoint, It's great. Add me on LinkedIn. It'll be really fun. We'll have great conversations. I also love Instagram because it's so visual.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very fun. I think it's the way that you can inspire people the most is by showing them pictures of the thing. But that's also because I'm a very visual learner. So those are my go-to social media platforms.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, follow me on ResearchGate, I guess. My main social media is obviously the YouTube. I try to interact with people in the comments there. Some comments are incredibly mean. You'll never feel worse about yourself by reading the 1 in 100 YouTube comment that tells you suck. But the rest of those are fantastic. You get really good discussion about people who have been like researching in this field for years and have like insightful things to contribute to the video or new ideas that they want to share. And then it's a good place to have people discussing the concepts covered in the video. If you're considering joining something like TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that is a fantastic way of getting your information out to a lot of people really quickly. The algorithms on those short form content are great at getting to a lot of people. It's harder to make a living on those short form platforms. The average revenue is terrible. So people often try to jump from the short form through to YouTube. Yeah, that's my key advice. But to communicate, yeah, those short things are great.
Yeah. I still regularly use Twitter. Yeah, I know it's called X, but you know, we all old timers still call it Twitter, because as I was saying earlier, there are still a lot of companies and organizations use that as a primary vehicle for making announcements. To be honest, a lot of the developments I've heard about what's going on at SpaceX come from an Elon tweet. You know, there are things like that there, and there's still as much of a cesspool as it can be. It's still you find the right communities is still very useful, but also increasingly blue sky, because there was a pretty large migration of scientists in particular from Twitter to blue sky in the last couple of years. And so if I'm interested in getting perspectives on scientific discoveries, for example, the putative biosignature on this exoplanet announced last week, there was a much more vibrant discussion about that going on blue sky. You know, it's got sort of the old Twitter feel to it. You see less of the big companies and organizations there, but you know, sort of another aspect of this community of people communicating in little bite-sized chunks and images about space and science topics.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was curious about. I have not quite migrated to blue sky, but used to love space Twitter, especially during launches and whatnot, and was curious if that had eventually migrated over, and now there's sort of two space Twitters. There's a space Twitter or an X Twitter, and then space Blue Sky Twitter, it sounds like.
Yeah, and there is some overlap, because I'm on both. Some people are on both. Some people have moved over to Blue Sky entirely.
Yeah.
There are some holdouts still sticking primarily to Twitter. So,
Okay.
so you sort of have to be on both to get the full picture.
On both. Excellent. Well, those are all the questions that I prepared, so I wanted to kind of give you each an opportunity if you had any closing thoughts or things that you wanted to share about today, about your work, about science communication generally. Feel free to use this opportunity, and then I guess we can take a few questions.
Go to the questions.
All right. Yes, in the back.
So enthusiastic. We love it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaren Chu, and I've been hearing talks about STEAM, talks about engaging and simplifying our messaging, especially to outside of the space community, using kids as a opportunity to refine that messaging. I'm personally very, very passionate about space food. And one thing, again, when we speak to the public or when we engage with non-technology, science-focused folks, the two most common questions, as maybe most of us in this room will hear about, was A, how do astronauts go to the bathroom in space? And B, what do they eat, right? So in that line of thought, I'm curious in your various vantage points, be that in a parabolic flight recently, or be that around some interesting piece of research you've encountered, are there exciting things on the human side, be that around using the bathroom or food, that you are excited about personally that you would like to share with this room today? Thank you.
Really good question.
On that, I would love to do a video of I ate space food for 100 days. Here's how sick I got. That would be a fascinating way of pitching that as a video. I myself haven't done research in that field, unfortunately.
It was fascinating. At a briefing NASA held last week about the most recent cargo Dragon mission to the space station, they made a point of mentioning exactly how many tortillas they had on board the spacecraft. 1,262, as it turns out. So you imagine tortillas are pretty popular in space. In fact, they knew more about that than how many experiments had to be taken off because they wanted to put more tortillas on the spacecraft.
Might not be so bad, James, with 100 days of space food. So I'm Carrie Kahoy, and I just wanted to thank all of you. I know most of you from your professional careers and appreciate what you do so much. I also wanted to hear a little bit from you. What you do actually is very impactful, and I know that a lot of the people in the room, we do science research, but a lot of the times our results might have direct impact for a company or a company's outlook or its investors or its potential funding sources, as well as the policy that Jeff mentioned before. Could you kind of comment on an example case that you might have had in an article that hopefully isn't too sensitive? I'm not asking any hardball questions here, but something where you noticed that what you did had a lot of, influence on either the company's actions or policy revision or review or feedback from somebody who used some of the results of the information that you broadcast to come to a new conclusion about what needed to be done or how to approach something. Because I just wanted to appreciate that communicating things is very powerful, and we've seen companies respond and investors respond to information as it's shared.
Well, I'll start with this. Is going to be a random example. So as I mentioned, I did this project with Lego, but this was part of that Lego Ideas contest, and this is an interesting. I mean, it's not quite aerospace industry, but trust me, there is a connection here. So the company is really good about soliciting ideas and suggestions from its community, and many people have projects that they put on the Lego Ideas platform. And I was really interested in wanting to encourage Lego to, and had written about this, diversify their offerings, and specifically had projects that I had created that had women focused. And as someone who had long been interested in the space industry and history, definitely wanted to make sure that we put out some, guess what? There are some amazing women who have contributed to the aerospace industry, whether astronauts or aerospace engineers, software engineers, and whatnot. And the reaction to the set was so immediate that it received the 10,000 votes within 15 days, which was not quite the record, but it was very close to the record. And I think it really, I actually have articles from like, industry sites about crowdsourcing for companies and like how, these are the kinds of things that people want to hear, and like listening to your audiences and listening to your the people that you're working with to create your products. And let me tell you, the set actually did, not to toot my own horn, but just to kind of answer like how this can make an industry dent. The set was sold out on Amazon within the first 24 hours, which was really amazing. And I don't think that's happened since, even though there's been some really cool sets. So that's just one random example. But like, if you have like an interesting advocacy platform and you can share it on social media, I think you really can move the needle in some cases. And obviously, it's a little bit more of a fun one, but curious to hear if you guys have other examples.
I've definitely had students reach out to me saying that they've changed how they've approached their own PhD thesis or their own research projects based on their techniques that I've been able to share. Like, I didn't make any of these techniques. I'm just taking things that I've learned in class and sharing them with the world. But people aren't always aware of the cool systems engineering that's happening here at MIT, or the new ways of approaching certain problems. So yeah, science communication is really important in actually telling people, here's the science, go use it.
Yes.
John Tilko, could you please talk about turning space communication into space advocacy, particularly with the government and the current budget crisis that the space community is facing? Like, how do we make this tangible in terms of not just public interest in space, but public advocacy for space?
That's a great question.
I think it's really important to, like I said before, communicate how space can enable multiple industries. Once you explain the importance of using microgravity to discover brand new drug treatments in brand new drug treatments or brand new protein crystallizations that cannot be created on Earth, it's like a light bulb goes off. This moment happened to me. Someone was like, oh my God, that's crazy. You mean that we can do X, Y, Z in microgravity? Oh, we never thought about doing that. And I'm like, great, I just created someone who's gonna be advocating for space just off of this one conversation. Things like in space manufacturing, things like using space to inspire young students. If you can make fans of space in more than just the little aerospace industry, that's how you're going to create the advocacy. And so you're going to have to make sure that your message aligns with the stakeholders within for-profit companies. It aligns with education. It aligns with government interests. And so I think that, for me at least, that's what's really important, is if you can explain why space is important for everyone and how space is going to benefit life on Earth, and not just we're going to space to go to space, that's how you can create that advocacy.
I'll note that as a journalist, it's not my job to be an advocate or take a particular stand on an issue. But I can say that, the best advocacy is well-informed advocacy. Having that background, having read the articles and so on, to understand the budget concerns, the threats to NASA science programs, potential cancellation of missions, things like that. Those are all things that we report on, and we know that they are going to be used by people who are going to advocate against those cuts, or for other reasons. So, we don't advocate, but we provide that factual foundation upon which advocacy can be effective.
Definitely. You want to add anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're running out of time, but I wanted to thank everybody who came to join us today, and thank you all for being here as well. This was really a pleasure to have this conversation with everyone, and I hope the rest of the day goes well.